Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host. Bishop Barron is not in studio with us today, and so instead, we're going to be sharing one of his most popular talks ever. It's titled The 7 Keys to the New Evangelization, and it was Bishop Barron's keynote talk at the 2014 Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, which is one of the largest religious conferences in the world. Every year it draws 10 to 15,000 people out to Los Angeles. And for this particular talk, they filled an arena to hear Bishop Barron outline these 7 keys. In today's episode, we're going to cover the first 3 keys of the new evangelization, which include leading with the beautiful, not dumbing down the message of Catholicism, and then preaching with ardor. Next week, we'll hear the final 4 keys to the new evangelization. But for today, sit back and enjoy this great talk from Bishop Barron.
Well, thank you all very much, and God bless you. Always wonderful to be here at the LA Congress. There's nothing like it anywhere in the church. The only place I know where a breakout session has 2,000 people. There was a wonderful moment, it happened about 20 minutes ago. I was sitting right out there ready to come on, and Sister Edith texted me. I hadn't seen her yet. And she said, are you here? The talk begins in 20 minutes. And I was devilishly tempted, I didn't do it, but to text back, oh, is that today? No, I'm here. Hey, listen, it really is a great honor and privilege to be with you at the Congress. And every time I come here, here's what I think, especially now seeing you all in one place. If we could harness the energy in this room, we could indeed set the world on fire. And that's exactly what I want to talk to you about. 7 recommendations for the new evangelization. 7 ways I think we can set the world on fire. Let me say right off the bat, these are born not just of theoretical musing, but born of a lot of practical experience the last 10 years or so when I've been doing work in evangelization. So 7 things that I've learned and I want to share with you. So if you're keeping score, here's number 1. Lead with the beautiful. Lead with the beautiful. Now, the philosophers know the 3 great transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? In our postmodern culture, it's very difficult to begin with the true. The minute you say, well, here's the truth of things, what happens? Well, people say, well, yeah, that's your truth, but not mine. Who are you to tell me what to believe? It's even worse beginning with the good. If I say, well, here's the way you ought to live, people say, well, who are you to tell me how to live? The hackles tend to go up readily in our postmodern culture when you begin with the good and the true. Which is why I suggest you begin with the beautiful. There's something less threatening, something more winsome about the beautiful. And we are a beautiful religion. It's one of the great marks of Catholicism. It's true, isn't it? It was a wager, by the way, behind much of the Catholicism series, is simply to show somebody Chartres Cathedral. I'm not telling you what to think yet, or how to behave yet. We'll get there. But just look at that. Or go into the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. Just look at that place, that jewel box. Or to me, one of the most moving moments of the filming of that series, to go to Calcutta. I'd never been to India before, never been to a place like Calcutta. And then to go into the worst sections of that city. And there discover, with radiant joy, these young women working with the poorest of the poor. Just look at them. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm not telling you how to behave. Just look at them. Or another thing from the Catholicism series, we had a cameraman who had worked a lot for NBC, a kind of a hard-bitten guy, been all over the world. He said, though, when he was filming the people arriving at Guadalupe on their knees, having walked across the whole city with the bloody knees. You know, of course, about this phenomenon. As he's gazing through the lens of his camera, he said the tears came to his eyes. Just look at that. Look at the beautiful. You know, a very good example of this method is the greatest Catholic novel of the last century. I'm talking about Evelyn Waugh's great Brideshead Revisited. Remember, the main character, the narrator of Brideshead, is a fellow named Charles Ryder. He's like a lot of people today, kind of a cool agnostic. But he's attracted to this beautiful English manor house called Brideshead. And of course, in Waugh's symbolic imagination, Brideshead is the church. Christ is the head of his bride, the church, etc. So Brideshead symbolizes the Catholic Church. What first drew Charles Ryder in was the beauty of the place. Then, in the course of the novel, he comes to realize that his life has to be as beautiful as the house he lives in. And only at the end of the day, at the very end of the novel, does he come to accept Catholicism as the truth. Watch the rhythm, from the beautiful to the good to the true. I'll give you another example, much more down to earth, I guess. When I was a little kid, I was 7 years old, my father brought me to Tiger Stadium in Detroit. Any Detroiters here today? All right. I'd never been to a pro baseball game before, and it was a night game, and my dad brought me and my brother up from the bowels of the stadium, and then we came out onto the main level, and I could see the bright green grass and the bright white uniforms of the Tigers, and I watched this professional game. To this day, it's in my mind's eye right now. To this day, I remember the beauty of that experience, the beauty of the game. The next spring is when I joined Little League. I played t-ball. Because see, the beautiful leads you to want to play. It leads you to want to get into this thing. Then I played Little League baseball until I was about 16. And in that process, I came to understand the rules of baseball very well. You play a game for a long time, you understand even the little rules like the infield fly rule. Notice the rhythm. From the beauty of the game to the goodness of playing the game, then to the truth of it. Now, can I suggest something to you? I came of age right after Vatican II. We did an awful lot of debating in those days, especially about sex and authority. Bad questions? No. People of goodwill engaging in them on all sides? Yes, indeed. But in a certain way, the church was leading too much with the true and the good and forgetting the beauty of the life. Now, revisit Pope Francis. Isn't that exactly what he's saying over and over again? Begin with the merciful face of Christ. Begin with the textured beauty of the Catholic life. And then lead people to the good and to the true. There's my first recommendation. Here's number 2. And I'm going to bang the podium as I say it. Don't dumb down the message. Now, I got a great room here full of teachers and preachers and catechists and publishers. So again, don't dumb down the message. I went to first grade in 1965, the year the council ended. Vatican II was produced by the cream of the intellectual crop of the mid-20th century. Rahner, Balthasar, de Lubac, Danielu, Congar, Ratzinger, Wojtyła, the list goes on and on. The best and brightest of the minds of that time produced Vatican II. The Vatican II documents are beautiful in their intellectual richness, texture, integrity. Why then, after the council, when I was coming of age in the church, did we experience the dumbed-down banners and balloons Catholicism? What I experienced as a kid was not this richly textured intellectual faith, but rather a superficial Catholicism. Can I say now, I'm too old, I guess, to keep covering this up. That was a pastoral disaster of the First Order. There were a lot of people in my generation who just opted out of Catholicism. How come? Because they grew up, and life hit them in the face, and they saw the complexity of things. And a childish, superficial Catholicism was no answer to the deep problems of life. A dumbed-down, superficial Catholicism led to the abandonment of the faith by a lot of people. John Henry Newman, one of my great heroes, said one of the surest signs that the faith is developing properly is that it relentlessly thinks about the data of revelation. We are a thinking religion. We're beautiful, yes. We're also a smart religion. When we mute that, it is a pastoral disaster. Something interesting to me? Go back to the mid-20th century. On both the Protestant and Catholic side, you see a flourishing of the intellectual life among Christians. Just listen to some of these names. W.H. Auden, the great poet, C.S. Lewis, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, Flannery O'Connor, Fulton Sheen, Reinhold Niebuhr, Paul Tillich, Graham Greene, Evelyn Waugh. The list goes on and on. There was a renaissance, a flourishing of Catholic intellectualism, Christian intellectualism in the mid-20th century. So how come we got the banners and balloons in the wake of the council? That has not served us well. Here's one of the problems too, everybody, is that now a successor generation, even 2 generations, have come to expect a dumbed-down religion. I'll give you an example. This happens to me from time to time. People come up to me and say, "Hey, Father, that homily you gave, those 3-syllable words, you're going to lose people with that. These referencing theologians, the kids aren't going to respond to that." And I say to them, you're a doctor, you went to med school, you read complicated medical journals. You're a lawyer, you went to law school, you read complex case studies. You're a private equity investor, you're taking over businesses, reading their business reports. Why in this area of life would you expect something dumbed down? Every other area of life, we even draw young people rather quickly into complex things. Why don't we do it in the area of the faith? I first read Romeo and Juliet when I was 14. I remember it vividly. I was a freshman in high school, and the teacher had us, take the various parts, and we read it aloud, and he would try to explain it to us. How much of Romeo and Juliet did I get when I was 14? Well, 10%. I got the basic storyline, the characters. But I still remember to this day my feeling of amazement that there is such a thing as that play. There is such a thing as this Shakespearean drama. This high, challenging, beautiful, deep, rich, complex thing. Did I get every bit of it? Of course not. But at 14, I was introduced to it. How many of our 14-year-olds are introduced to Thomas Aquinas? Oh, how's that possible? Well, they're reading Shakespeare at 14. Why can't they be introduced to Aquinas, to Augustine, to Newman, to Chesterton, to Dante? We're the ones who have to do this. We, teachers, preachers, catechists, priests, publishers. A dumbed-down Catholicism does not serve. Here's a last little story. About 10 years ago when the new atheists were all in vogue, and there were a lot of requests for interviews and all that, I was on a radio program actually in Canada, and there was a kind of a feisty interviewer who was asking me about Christopher Hitchens and challenging, and so I got in the debate with him. At the end, what he said to me? "Father, would you at least admit that Christopher Hitchens got you Catholics thinking about these things for the first time?" Well, I paused to let my annoyance sink in, and then I said, "I'm the very inadequate representative of the oldest intellectual tradition in the West. That includes Origen and Augustine and Chrysostom and Jerome and Anselm and Aquinas and Bonaventure and Newman and Chesterton and John Paul II. Trust me when I tell you we did not need Christopher Hitchens to get us to think about these things." But see, friends, part of the problem was, look at that phenomenon, the new atheism, is a large part of the culture has turned on us. Go on YouTube sometime. That's where a lot of my ministry is. Those men, Hitchens and Dawkins and Sam Harris, talk about evangelists. Clear, articulate, smart, and they've got millions of followers. We need to be in that fight with the full arsenal of our intellectual tradition. A dumbed-down Catholicism will not serve. Okay, excuse the histrionics, but it leads well to my third point. Third thing, I think, for the new evangelization. We have to preach with ardor. John Paul said in Port-au-Prince in 1983, the new evangelization is new in expression, it's new in method, and it's new in ardor. Ardor, fire. Aristotle said long ago that finally people only really listen to an excited speaker. It's true, isn't it? Think of, some silly commercial about the latest, ab reducer, and you got someone who's just brimming over with fiery enthusiasm. If they can muster enthusiasm for that, we can muster it for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Here's something else about Vatican II and how wonderful now on the 50th anniversary of Vatican II that we celebrate those great documents. Vatican II, I think, is best construed as a missionary council. Remember when John the 23rd announced the council, he was photographed next to a giant globe. And at that press conference, he used for the first time this phrase that eventually became the title of one of the great documents, namely, Lumen Gentium. Boy, that goes all the way back to the prophet Isaiah. The light of the nations. Christ is the Lumen Gentium. The church's whole raison d'etre, the whole reason for being of the church, is to carry the lumen to the Gentiles. John the 23rd was saying it's time to knock down the bastions, not so much to let the modern world in, as to let the church out, to let the life of the church out. Now, was some modernization called for? Of course. To make the church a more apt vehicle for the proclamation of the gospel. But here's the thing, everybody. I don't think the purpose of Vatican II was to modernize the church. The purpose of Vatican II was to Christify the world, was to send us out like seed, to send us out like light bearers to the ends of the world. Again, the trouble, though, I think, when the church that I came of age in, was a church that was largely debating with itself, again, about sex and authority. Not bad questions, not bad people. But I wonder if that was the best way to express the ardent missionary enthusiasm of Vatican II. Here's something else about ardor. Where does ardor come from for Christians? It comes from clarity about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Now, let me tell you a story. About 5 years ago, I was invited to a conference on evangelization, and I was there like on the third day of the conference, so there were a number of talks before mine. And I got up, and my opening line was, evangelization is about declaring Jesus Christ risen from the dead, at which point the whole crowd broke into applause. And I said, on behalf of the risen Jesus, I want to thank you all. But I was honestly kind of puzzled, like why would that line have triggered that reaction? So afterwards, I asked a number of people, you know what they said? They said, Father, we've been here for 3 days at this conference. We've heard talks about the culture, about sociology, about the church, about this and that. Nobody's mentioned the resurrection. That's a problem, everybody. Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, is the good news. It is the Evangelion, the glad tidings. Good. You know what there was too much of, though, in the last 30, 40 years? Turning the resurrection into a bland symbol or myth or legend or literary device. When we do that, in the attempt maybe to make ourselves more appealing to the academy, when we do that, we cut the legs out from under evangelization. It's the facticity of the bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead that sent them careering around the world. You know, in the New Testament, you read from Matthew to Revelation. These are not texts written by, kind of blandly indifferent spiritual writers who want to share some timeless truth about the spiritual life. No. There's I always call it a grab you by the lapels quality about the New Testament, isn't there? They want to grab the whole world by the lapels and tell them about something that was so extraordinary it changed their lives and sent them around the world and to their deaths declaring it. People don't do that for myths and symbols and legends and literary devices. They do it for the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And that's where the ardor comes from. I think we've got to recover clarity about that to do our work well.
And that's where we'll stop this week's episode of the Word on Fire show. I know you're itching to hear the final 4 keys to the new evangelization, but that just means you'll have to tune in next week to the Word on Fire show, where we'll share the rest of this great talk from Bishop Barron. To make sure that you don't miss next week's episode, be sure to visit wordonfireshow.com and click on the subscribe button. It's totally free, and it will ensure that you'll be notified when the next episode is available. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.